This is the Pro Football Report, presented by BCWSA, a weekly recap of your Eagles and news around the NFL. Broadcasting live from the beautiful Philadelphia Protestant home in Northeast Philadelphia, today's show is brought to you by SEPTA, Ventresca's Custom Clothing, The Capitol Grill, BCWSA, the Philadelphia Protestant home, Chickies and Pete's, Rob's Automotive and Collision, CJ's Tire and Automotive Services, live to the beautiful Philadelphia Protestant home in Northeast Philadelphia for the Pro Football Report, presented by BCWSA. Now, here is your host, voice of the Philadelphia Eagles, Merrill Reese.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be with you. We are broadcasting at the Philadelphia Protestant home in Northeast Philadelphia, and we have with us today a nice gathering of members from the Northeast Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. I have a great guest tonight. I stole him, actually, because he is in retirement. As many of you know, it was the biggest retirement story of the year, and I'm talking about my close friend, Ray Didinger. And Ray is still alive and well and tuned into everything that is happening in the Philadelphia sports scene. And once in a while, for a good friend, he will come out of his teepee and join us with his presence and give us the benefit of his vast knowledge of the National Football League and the game of football in a broader sense. Ray, it's great to have you with us.
Great to be with you, Merrill, as always.
Ray, it's been a crazy preseason. Here we are, just a number of games away from the beginning of the NFL season, and we have a lot of people out there, not everybody, but we have a lot of people out there who are already talking Super Bowl. I haven't seen or felt this high a group of expectations. I don't know, since they assembled something years ago called the Dream Team that turned out to be a nightmare. Even going into the Super Bowl year of 2017, I don't think anybody was thinking these thoughts.
No. It's Jason Kelce actually addressed this a month or so ago when the expectations began building to where they are now. That Jason Kelce said in his experience with the Eagles, which now goes back a ways, he said, the years when a lot was expected of us, we generally disappointed. The years that we did well were the years when there were low expectations. Maybe this year will be an exception, but, after he said that, I thought about it, and I said, like most things Jason Kelce said, he's right. But the expectations are extremely high for this team. I just saw, I know you look at the NFL.com website, same as I do, and this week they had all the people that write for NFL.com, the website, making their Super Bowl predictions. And 6 of the writers picked the Eagles to be in the Super Bowl, and these are not Philadelphia people, these are national reporters that have supposedly a sort of an objective overview of the league. But 6 of them picked the Eagles to be in the Super Bowl. And one of them picked the Eagles to win. The other 5 picked them to get there and not win against various opponents, mostly the Bills, a couple times the Chiefs. But Greg Rosenthal picked them to go to the Super Bowl and beat the Kansas City Chiefs. So, that's a lot. The only other team in the NFC that got mentioned in the Super Bowl more than them was the Packers. So they're being thought of at that level. So you sitting here talking about Super Bowl, me sitting here mentioning the term Super Bowl, doesn't make us outliers. Around the league, a lot of people are saying the same thing.
See, I never say Super Bowl. I might if I lived in Green Bay. I might if I lived in Kansas City, where you have a team that has done it before. Mm-hmm. I might have in 2018. Coming off of a Super Bowl championship, thinking they could be that good or better the following year because they were getting Carson Wentz back. But when I think of this Eagles team, I am aware of the possibilities. I am aware of the holes that Howie Roseman filled, I think, better than anybody expected and more thoroughly. But I also say, number one, the NFL is a war of attrition. Mm-hmm. And number two, we're not really sure what this team is going to look like. When we last saw them, they didn't look very good against the Tampa Bay Bucks in their one playoff game. And
Right.
it was a shock. The truth is, you want me to be honest with you? And I try to be honest. The only reason the Eagles were a playoff team last year was because there was an expanded group of playoff teams. They expanded the amount of teams that went to the playoffs.
Sure.
Otherwise, they were a slightly better than 500 team.
Right.
But not what you would call a legitimate playoff team that had a chance to really go deep.
Right.
I didn't go into the Tampa Bay game thinking they were going to beat Tom Brady and the Bucs.
Yeah.
If there was an upset, fine, that would be great. But I didn't anticipate that. This year, they are a lot better. But then there's something else that hit me. I don't know how many of you out there have watched the television show on HBO, Hard Knocks. And this year, the team of focus is the Detroit Lions. And they have a coach. Some people say he's crazy. He's a little bit over the top. His name is Dan Campbell, a former tight end. But I watched this show and get a little bit nervous because the Detroit Lions hit every day of practice, or almost every day of practice. They do something called tackling to the ground. Did you ever hear of tackling to the ground, where they actually tackle a ball carrier or receiver and make sure he is on the ground before the play is over? Now, the new NFL, and Nick Sirianni and the Eagles are not the only team that is subscribing to this, but a good portion of the teams no longer do this. Their number one objective is to get through the preseason unscathed. But I wonder, when the Eagles arrive in Detroit and these guys are battle-tested and hardened and ready for real tough contact, how the Eagles are going to hold up coming off a preseason where the regulars played very, very little, and even the training camp days, I have no problem with the length of the practices. Hour and a half, that's fine, because they're well organized, they're well orchestrated, they're fast, they get in a lot of plays. There's a lot of energy, a lot of preparation, a lot of good meetings. They put in the time, but they don't put in the physical nature of the game. So I'm worried when this team meets that team who is ready for war.
You're 100% right. I've had the same thought. I've watched Hard Knocks. I didn't watch every episode, but I watched some. And it was just about what I would have expected, knowing Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell is what they call an old school coach. And he believes that football is a game of contact. And he believes that the only way you can get ready to play football is to practice football, which means hitting, and it means tackling, and it means running physical practices. And a lot of what the Eagles are doing now sort of subscribes, as Merrill said, to what the new NFL is, which is dictated by the collective bargaining agreement. There are only certain, you can only practice so many days, you have to give players days off, you can only practice so many hours, you can only wear pads so many times. A lot of this is mandated from the league office. It's not just the coach's call. But Dan Campbell pushes it to the limit. I mean, as long as they can be on the field, they're on the field. As much as they're allowed to hit, they're going to hit. And he has said that to his players. And it's obvious there were a couple sessions there where the players were upset with him. And they knew guys on other teams that weren't practicing the way we're practicing, and they weren't happy about it. And after one practice, he sort of let them know that this is the way, we're getting ready to play football, fellas. And we're going to come out and we're going to play like the Detroit Lions play. And I don't, I know what's happening in other camps, and I don't care. We're going to go about this our way. Well, what you're going to get here in week one is you're going to get a meeting of two very different philosophies. Yeah. You're going to have one team coming into this that prepared one way, and you're going to get another team coming in that prepared a totally different way. And I have to admit, watching Hard Knocks, I kind of was sitting there kind of sort of shifting in my chair saying, I wonder if Nick's watching this. Because they, it didn't surprise me because I know Dan Campbell's methodology. But they're going to come into this game on Sunday with a whole different methodology than what the Eagles do. And we'll see who comes out ahead. One other thing you should keep in mind, when the Eagles played the Lions last year, they played them in Detroit and they beat them 44-6. I mean, they embarrassed the Detroit Lions in their own stadium. I guarantee you this week that tape has been running in the Detroit Lions complex. And I guarantee you every time that Dan Campbell has gotten up to talk to his team, he has talked about 44-6 and how this team came in here and they embarrassed us last year. But this is going to be a different story. So all of those factors lead me into thinking that while everybody in this city thinks that Sunday's going to be a walkover, I mean, everybody I talk to.
I don't.
So, nor do I. But everybody I talk to says, this is going to be easy. Boy, Eagles have an easy start to the season. Don't be so sure. I mean, I still think they're going to win, but I can guarantee you they're going to have a fight on their hands.
Yeah, I don't know. The question is, can the superior talent, which the Eagles are the superior talented team, overcome the physical nature of the Detroit Lions and their preparation? And what's going to happen to the Lions 3, 4, 5 weeks down the line? Does the physical punishment that they endure during training camp suddenly catch up to them? Do they become a tired team, a weary team? And conversely, do the Eagles pick up and get a little stronger each week and build? And last year, in all honesty, the Eagles had one of the best years ever in terms of staying healthy.
They did. For a team that had really been racked by injuries for a number of years prior to this, I mean, we've all talked about year after year, the injuries, just one after another. Even a Super Bowl year, even the year that they won the Super Bowl, look at all the injuries that they had, and they managed to overcome it. Well, you can't do that every year. But year after year, I mean, they lost key players. Every week they were losing somebody. And last year, you're right, Merrill. I mean, last year they were one of the healthiest teams in the league. So when you look at Nick Sirianni's way of preparing his team and the way they practice and the way they train, if you looked at last year, you would say it worked. I mean, they got that team through the season healthy, and healthy enough that down the stretch, I mean, remember, they started poorly last year. They were 2-5 and didn't look very good. And mid-season, they started to play, and they had enough players and they had enough gas in the tank down the stretch that they were able to play really good football down the stretch and actually get to the playoffs. So Nick Sirianni's way of preparing his team worked last year. It got him to the playoffs, which I don't think a whole lot of people saw coming, and it got him there healthy. Now we'll see. We'll see if he can do it another year in a row. Because, as Merrill said, it really is. You look around the NFL, the teams that are there at the end, the teams that win championships, are generally the healthy teams. And some of that you can control, and some of it you can't. Some of it's just bad luck. That's just the nature of football. But that is a significant part of it. And the way the Eagles are practicing now, I mean, Nick Sirianni had no questions and no apologies for the way we're practicing. We want to get our key players to week 1 healthy and ready to go, and he feels that they are.
And you are so right. You have to be lucky. You do have to be lucky. I remember one year the Eagles had something called Flight Night, where they invite everybody, all the fans, for free to come out to the link and watch a good practice on a Sunday night. And the Eagles linebackers were warming up. I was down on the sideline. They were warming up about 5 feet away from me, and they were just doing these little cross steps, not any hitting, not any football moves, just little cross steps as they walked down the line. And all of a sudden, their star linebacker, or one of their ascending linebackers, Stuart Bradley, collapsed and went to the ground with a torn ACL. The other night, Sunday night, I was watching the college game, LSU against Florida State, and LSU has a great defensive tackle. And after one of his teammates made a great tackle, he leaped into the air to celebrate and came down and his knee buckled, and they took him off, and I don't know how long he's out for, but he was one of the projected first-round draft choices this year. Mm-hmm. And he may have an ACL or something even, who knows how serious it is. But you do have to be lucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. You do. And especially now, they keep adding games to the season. We're up to 17 now.
It'll get to 18.
It'll get to 18. It might get to 20. I mean, they're just going to keep adding games, and it's going to be harder and harder to get your teams through the season. And coaches are going to have to be smart about how they prepare. But obviously, in Dan Campbell and Nick Sirianni, you have two very, very different philosophies at work.
All right, we will be back with Ray Didinger right after this.
BCWSA customers, former Phillies pitcher Tommy Green here. I played on the 1993 National League champs, so I know a thing or two about what it's like playing on a winning team. BCWSA has all the ingredients. They make it easy for their customers to get automatic updates by text, email, or phone anytime there is a disruption in your service area. You can even customize your alerts by going to bcwsa.net. That's bcwsa.net. BCWSA, your partner for a safer environment. BCWSA, proven.
We now return to the Philadelphia Protestant home in Northeast Philadelphia for the Pro Football Report, presented by BCWSA. Once again, here is your host, voice of the Philadelphia Eagles, Merrill Reese.
And once again, we welcome all the members of the Northeast Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce who are our guests this afternoon as we talk Eagles football. Ray Didinger is our guest, and Ray and I were talking about the difference in preparation between what the Lions are doing each day and what the Eagles are doing each day. I look at this team, Ray, and somebody had asked me, I did a little question and answer before we went on the air about the bright spot, and I said, you can project bright spots. I'm a big Jalen Hurts fan. I think he's going to turn out to be terrific. But let's talk about bright spots going into the season. So those are the things we know. I think the single brightest spot going in or area is the offensive line, which might be the best in the National Football League.
It's really good. It really is. I'm not afraid to say they're the best. I think they are. When you see, and we talked a little bit about the fact that this team stumbled out of the gate last year at 2-5. What really turned their season around was at midseason, Nick Sirianni did what good coaches do. He stepped back and said, "Well, wait a minute. What we're doing here isn't working. What do we have to do to work our way out of it?" And every time a coach gets to that point, what good coaches do is they start with a simple thing. What is our strength? What is the best thing that we do? Okay, let's forget about the big picture and let's just get down to the very basic fundamentals. And let's start with just saying, who are our best players? What's our strongest area? He said, well, it's our offensive line. Okay, well, you know what? I know it's a passing league. I know we're setting all kinds of passing records. I know teams are scoring points by the bushel. But right now for us, the best thing we can do is just get real simple and just lean on our strength, which is our offensive line. And you saw when they did that, and they were running the ball 40 times a game, which you just don't see in today's NFL, but it worked because those guys are that good. And you got them all back this year, pretty much. And I don't see any reason why they're not going to be the best offensive line in football again. And if you're going to really win, and if you're going to talk about going to the postseason and maybe going to a Super Bowl, you really do have to start at the line of scrimmage. That's one of the things that Andy Reid talked about all the time. Andy absolutely believed that winning football teams are built at the line of scrimmage, offensive line and defensive line. And the Eagles are really good on the offensive line. I mean, Jordan Mailata has become not just a good left tackle, but a really good left tackle. I mean, one of the best in the league, the best in this division for sure, maybe the best in the NFC, and probably one of the top 2 or 3 in all of football, which is amazing considering where he came from. And then you've got Jason Kelce, who to me is an all-time player at center. I mean, I think he's probably a future Hall of Famer. I really do think.
Oh, he is.
I mean, Eagles Hall of Fame that's like done. I mean, they could do that. They could do that today at 2:00 if they wanted to.
Or 6 years ago.
But I'm talking about the Hall of Fame in Canton. I think he and his brother are both going to be in there someday. They are that good. Lane Johnson. Lane Johnson's been around a long time. Last year he played really well. He didn't give up a sack all year last year, which there aren't too many right tackles in football that can say that. And they get Sayamalu back. And Landon Dickerson came in last year and played really good. I mean, I wasn't sure how he would make the conversion from being a center at Alabama to a guard. But after a couple games when he kind of got the feel for it, man, he got really good. And you got all those guys coming back. I mean, they're really good where you have to be good, which is at the line of scrimmage. And their offensive line, I agree with you 100%. That's the strength of this team.
Ray Didinger, their backup offensive line might be better than some teams' starting offensive line. I mean, not every team, but maybe 5 or 6 of them that are really struggling on the offensive line.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I really I mean, some people kind of scratch their head when the Eagles drafted Juergens with their second pick. So what are you drafting another center for? You got a center.
I said who?
Yeah. Well, I was watching the tape and I saw him, and it's funny when watching him on tape. I said, this kid reminds me of Jason Kelsey. I mean, he looked like him, he played like him, he had a lot of the same attributes. Now, I never thought the Eagles were going to draft him because they already had Jason Kelsey, but they were thinking, look, as good as Jason is, I mean, this could very well be his last year. We don't know. I mean, any year could be his last year. So you need that next guy to come in and be able to play, who can be able to fill that position, which ain't going to be easy. Juergens is really good. I mean, when he
is.
You know, we didn't see much of Jason Kelsey in the preseason, hardly any. So Juergens got to play a lot. But when he played, boy, he was really, really good. I agree with you. I think if you look across this roster, you mentioned Howie Roseman and the job that he did in this offseason. Really good job, a really good job. But you look at this roster today compared to the one that played down in Tampa Bay in the playoff game. They are deeper. They are faster, for sure. I mean, you see it on defense. They are a much faster defensive team. And I think that, at the receiver core, I think in addition, A.J. Brown is going to give them a player they didn't have before, and it's going to make Devontae Smith that much more dangerous on the other side. And another year in growth, you expect Jalen Hurts to be better than he was last year. So, I mean, all signs for this team are very positive. I mean, the arrow is definitely pointing up for this team. And I'm not prepared to say Super Bowl, but obviously some other people are. But one thing I can tell you is I think this is going to be a really fun football season.
Let me go back to the offensive line and to your praise about what they focused on last year in running the football. Will they do it again? Or will they go into this season because they have invested heavily in A.J. Brown, because they have Devontae Smith, because they have Zach Pascal, who they brought over, Quez Watkins. Because of that, will they be a throw-first football team that tries to build leads and then runs the ball down their throat in the second half as they run off the clock?
I think yes. I think last year they did what they had to do to stabilize the situation, to compete week to week and get their season back on track. I don't think and look, any of you that have listened to me on the radio or seen me on TV for the last 10 years know that I am Mr. Run the Football, okay? I mean, every week Andy Reid, as much as I love him, Andy drove me crazy with he just wouldn't run the ball, and it drove me nuts. I really do like running the football, but I understand that this is a different time, and the era of the Jim Browns and the Gale Sayers and Jim Taylors and 3 yards in a cloud of dust. That's not the NFL today. The Eagles did a really good job last year doing what they did, and they got through their season, and they won their 9 games, and they got to the playoffs. But I don't really think that's – and if you look at the offenses that Nick Sirianni has been in up to this point, they have been primarily passing offenses, and that's what he wants to do. And this year I think they are better equipped to do it. I think they are. I think A.J. Brown really makes a big difference in the passing game. You mentioned Zach Pascal. I think Zach Pascal is a really good player. I mean, sort of an under-the-radar. People have talked about other acquisitions.
No, but he's good.
I think he's really good, and he's exactly the kind of receiver that a young quarterback needs to work with. And Jalen Hurts is still a young quarterback. But Zach Pascal is just a tremendous pattern runner. I mean, he just runs great routes. I mean, he cuts them off exactly right. He's exactly where he should be when he's supposed to be there. If you're talking about a 12-yard dig, he hits it at 12 yards, boom. I mean, and it's across the middle. And so if you're a young quarterback, you can trust a guy like that. You know exactly where he's going to be at a given moment, and you can throw that ball on anticipation, knowing, okay, he's not there yet, but I know he's going to be. And that's when they talk about the quick release. You can only have a quick release and an anticipation thrower if he trusts the guys he's throwing to. Mm-hmm. And Zach Pascal is the kind of receiver who he doesn't round things off. He doesn't kind of just go off on his own and say, well, you know what, I think I'm going to go here. I mean, which frankly, Rager did a lot. Rager to this day still doesn't know how to run a pass pattern. He just doesn't. And it's hard for a quarterback to trust a guy like that. You can trust A.J. Brown. You can trust Zach Pascal. So I think having receivers like that, and obviously, Devontae Smith is a given. I mean, he came out of college like an NFL player. So with receivers like that across the board, that's one of the reasons why I kind of share Merrill's optimism. I think Jalen Hurts is going to have a really good year.
I do. I made a statement on the pregame show with Glenn Macnow, our buddy, one night when we're looking for things to talk about on the pregame show before a game that means nothing. And I said that I believe, in my opinion, this is, now I'm not even talking about tight ends, that this is the most talented group of wide receivers in Eagles history. And I'm talking about basically the first four with Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Quez Watkins, and Zach Pascal. Those four together. And Glenn said, the greatest in Eagles history? And I said, yeah. When you he said, well, how about Harold and Mike Quick? Well, they're great. But Harold was in his last year and past his prime. And do you know how many catches Mike had in his first year? 10.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
That was 10.
Yeah.
So can you, Ray, you're the inventor of the greatest book ever written in the history of the Philadelphia Eagles, the Eagles Encyclopedia. You can still go out and buy it. It's every Eagles
available on Amazon.
Available on Amazon. We have one on our coffee table. Our house would not be without the Eagles Encyclopedia by Ray Didinger. In fact, they have the Super Bowl edition too. That's on our bookshelf. So, but it's the best compilation of Eagles history you will ever find anywhere. So you are the perfect person to ask the question to, is this the best or the most, going into the season, the most talented group of wide receivers this team has ever had?
Wow. It's almost, it's very hard to compare when you go back over long periods of time because the game changes so much.
Sure. But, okay, and you wrote the great show, Tommy and Me, about Tommy McDonald, who's in the Hall of Fame and was just an amazing little wide receiver. But who would you put with Tommy to make that as a group?
Yeah, Retzlaff.
But what he was a tight end, wasn't he?
No, he was in the championship year. In the championship year, for those of you, how many of you here remember 1960? I'm curious. Okay, that number gets smaller every year. But in 1960, McDonald was the flanker, Retzlaff was the split end, and the tight end was Bobby Walston.
Bobby Walston was the tight end.
Yeah, so I mean, the two wide receivers, in today's terminology, were Retzlaff and McDonald, who were great. I mean, McDonald's a Hall of Famer, and Retzlaff probably should be. But in the quote-unquote what we define as the modern era, which is from Super Bowl I on, boy, yeah, wow. You know, I mean, the pairing of Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin, that was pretty good too.
Yeah, and Jason Avant.
I mean, that was pretty good too. But I mean, this group has the potential to be right there because they complement each other very well. Devontae Smith was, I've said this before, Devontae Smith, before the Eagles ever drafted him, his final year at Alabama, he was my favorite player in all of college football. I just loved Devontae Smith. And I never imagined that the Eagles were going to wind up with him.
I
didn't imagine he was going to wind up wearing an Eagles uniform. I just loved watching him play at Alabama.
I figured I liked him too much for him to end up here.
Yeah, I kind of shared the same feeling. Yeah. God, this guy is great.
He is.
He is really great. And then lo and behold, he winds up as an Eagle. So, and my feeling about him hasn't changed. I think he is. I think he's a flat-out star. I really do. And I know there was a lot of concern about he's 166 pounds and all of that. But if you watched him play at Alabama, he had no fear of coming across the middle. He would do that. But he had a Marvin Harrison-like ability not to take the big hit. I mean, the guy caught 1 million passes at Alabama, but he never really got the big hit. He always had that ability to kind of roll, slide, get away from it. And I kind of thought that would translate in the NFL, and we saw last year that it did. Now, you take him and you put a guy like A.J. Brown, who's a more physical, tough, almost looks like a running back with the ball, who's going to get you lots of yards. Devontae doesn't get you a ton of yards after the catch. He gets great separation, and he catches everything. But on the other side, A.J. Brown is more of a yards after the catch guy. And I think they will complement each other really well. And then you got Dallas Goedert, who does a really good job at the tight end position. He got more yak yards than almost any tight end in football last year. And then you've got your slot guys. You've got Quez, who has the speed to burn you deep. And then you've got Zach Pascal, who is, as I said, just a terrific pattern runner. This is a really good receiver core. And, we talk, Merrill's high on Hurts, as am I. But everybody keeps talking about it, Hurts has to do this, Hurts has to do this, Hurts has to do that. They need this from Hurts and that. Hurts will do his job. I mean, but he needs everybody else around him to do their job. If everybody else around him does their job, the offensive line plays as well as I think it can play, and you get this receiver corps playing as good as they can play, which I think is really high level, then Jalen Hurts will, he's going to step right in there with the rest of them. But it's not as simple as just what one guy does. Football doesn't work that way. Even great players need other people around them. So if Jalen Hurts, everybody talks about taking that next step, well, the other guys have to take that step with him. But I think they have the personnel to do that.
Back with Ray right after this.
A flawless occasion begins at the Capitol Grill. From the moment you step into the Capitol Grill, located in the heart of Center City, the experience is one of comfortable elegance. Whether you're looking to host a private affair, a perfect lunch stop, or dinner destination, start your occasion at the Capitol Grill today. Visit thecapitolgrill.com or call 215-545-9588. That's 215-545-9588 for the Capitol Grill, Center City.
We now return to the Philadelphia Protestant home in Northeast Philadelphia for the Pro Football Report, presented by BCWSA. Once again, here is your host, voice of the Philadelphia Eagles, Merrill Reese.
My good friend Ray Didinger, always great to speak with Ray. I love to talk to Ray many Monday mornings. I'll get up and I'll call Ray just to talk and hear his opinions because I respect Ray and his knowledge so greatly. Ray, we're talking a lot about offense so far, but this team went out and drafted the two biggest impactful players in the national championship Georgia Bulldogs team. And I think they have got to make this defense better.
Yeah, and I think they will. We had the one gentleman who was talking about Jordan Davis earlier when you were doing the Q&A and was comparing Jordan Davis as a player to Warren Sapp. They're different kinds of players. Obviously, Sapp was much more of a quicker slide off the block, penetrate, three technique kind of guy, whereas Jordan Davis is just he is a massive human being. I remember seeing him. I met him at the Maxwell Club dinner this year. He won the Chuck Bednarik Award as Defensive Player of the Year in college football, and so he came into Atlantic City to accept his award. And I had seen him play all year at Georgia. I had watched all their games. I knew, he's a big guy. And then he walked in the room. I said, whoa.
Yeah.
There's big, and then there's like really big, and he is really big. And I think that what you've seen here in the preseason when he has played is he is a really powerful player. I mean, even here playing against NFL players, it's hard to move him. I mean, he takes on double teams and just stands them straight up. He's got some stuff to learn. I think there's no question in my mind he has the potential to be a really, really top defensive lineman. I mean, a Pro Bowl level player over a long period of time. The one thing he really has to do, and this he really has to do, is he really has to be very mindful of his weight and his conditioning. I mean, he's a guy that, as big as he is, he can't afford to get bigger. And he has to maintain his conditioning so that in college, I mean, there were games in college where he only played 20 or 25 snaps a game because they tried to keep him fresh. They wanted him fresh for the fourth quarter. And in the NFL, if you're going to be the guy in the defensive line, you're going to be a real stud player there. You got to be able to play more than that. Now, they're not going to ask him to play every snap the way Aaron Donald does with the Rams. It's one of the reasons why Aaron Donald is a great player. Unlike everybody rotates their defensive linemen all the time. You talk about we need 3 tackles, we need 4 tackles. And with the Rams, Aaron Donald plays every snap, and he's still the best defensive lineman in football. That's why he's special. And no one's going to expect Jordan Davis to do that, but he's probably going to have to play more snaps than he did in college. And you're also going to ask him to be more of a pass rusher than he was in college. He just really played the run in college, whereas I think he does have the ability, and you saw it. Those of you that saw the combine, this guy at 360 pounds ran a 4.840. I mean, he ran the 40-yard dash as fast as some tight ends, faster than most. That's he's a pretty rare athlete, and you want to see him use some of that speed to not just tie up the blockers, but to actually get across the line of scrimmage, collapse the pocket, and get on top of the quarterback. And I think he can do that.
Actually, the player that he reminds me more of, and he's very outgoing also, more than Warren Sapp, is Jerome Brown.
Yeah, that's not a bad comparison. And Jerome had some of the same issues in terms of conditioning. You know, when he was serious about his conditioning, you know, and he wasn't eating all of his meals at the drive-through window at Wendy's, and he got himself in shape, he was about unblockable. I mean, his last year before his tragic passing was his best year, and that year. Remember that offseason, he dropped 35 pounds. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember he came to training camp. He almost didn't look the same guy. And he was a much better player for it. And Jordan Davis, if he can keep his weight in check, and, you know, he has 360 pounds. We're not asking him to get to 280, okay? But he just can't get much bigger than that because from a conditioning standpoint, you need that stamina and you need that quickness. If he can stay right there, I think he's going to be a really, really good player. And his teammate, Nakobe Dean, who comes in as the linebacker, who I think was an absolute steal in the third round. I was stunned that he was there in the third round, and I was delighted when I saw the Eagles get him because I think he's a really smart player. And on that Georgia defense, it was the best defense in college football last year. They won the national championship, and I'm sure everybody saw them a lot. A lot of great players on that defense, and they had 7 guys off that defense drafted in the first 2 rounds of this NFL draft. That's extraordinary that they had that much talent on the field at any one time. But the leader of that defense, without any question, was Nakobe Dean. I mean, if you saw the defensive huddle, you had all these players who were first-round draft pick players. They were all star players. But the guy in the huddle that was doing the talking was Nakobe Dean, and everybody was listening. And so I think that he brings that kind of leadership here. The Eagles really haven't had that kind of force, that kind of leader, that kind of orchestrator in the middle of their defense really for a long time. And you need it in your defensive linebacker. You need it in your middle linebacker. And I think that Nakobe Dean, even as a young player, is going to develop into that player for the Eagles. One
quick Jerome Brown story before we take a break. I did a show from the Bellevue called the Broadway Restaurant Bar, and I'd have a different Eagles player every Monday night. So I had Jerome Brown one week, and after we got up, Jerome he went to the counter, the deli counter, he ordered 2 corned beef specials, 2 roast beef specials, and a pound of potato salad. So I said, "You're going home? You having a Monday night football party?" He said, "No, Merrill, this is for me." We'll be back with Ray right after this.
The SEPTA Transit Police Department is hiring experienced officers and entry-level new recruits. Apply today to join the department that keeps one of the largest transit systems in the country safe and comfortable for all who ride. There is no residency requirement and salaries start at $56,000. Benefits include tuition reimbursement, the opportunity to rotate through specialized units, and a dynamic and supportive working environment. Build your career in law enforcement with SEPTA. Learn more and apply today at jobs.septa.org.
We now return to the Philadelphia Protestant home in Northeast Philadelphia for the Pro Football Report, presented by BCWSA. Once again, here is your host, voice of the Philadelphia Eagles, Merrill Reese.
And back we are, Merrill Reese, Ray Didinger. Ray, going into the season, I think most people think of it as a 2-horse race in the NFC East, with the Giants and the Commanders bringing up the rear. I don't know how close the Cowboys are in personnel to the Eagles right now, particularly since they have lost Tyron Smith,
right,
their best left tackle, and their wide receiver core that was so good last year with Amari Cooper and Cedric Wright and also C.D. Lamb and also Michael Gallup is depleted because Cooper is now in Cleveland, Wright is in Miami, and Gallup isn't galloping much coming off of an ACL.
Right. And C.D. Lamb he's there and he's healthy and he's good, but he's he's about all they got. And, I think we've all seen the offensive line for the Cowboys, which was really good and was sort of what we're talking about the Eagles. That's kind of the strength of the team. That's kind of what the Cowboys' offensive line was a few years ago. Their offensive line was the best in the league, and they were really good. And their offense was kind of built around that. And it kind of allowed Dak Prescott to kind of grow into an NFL quarterback because he had tremendous help up front. That offensive line isn't there anymore. And they got a couple of those guys left, but Tyron Smith is out again with another injury. He hasn't been healthy for a full season for a long time. Zach Martin's still a good player, but that's about all they got. Just about every way you look at the NFC East, it's hard not to like the Eagles to win this division. And it's not really a stretch when you say that. The Giants, to me, are far away. Washington has some players on defense, but Chase Young is a key player, and he's coming off an injury. Carson Wentz, we don't know. We have no idea, what he is at this point. Could he have a big bounce back year? Maybe, I suppose. But after what we saw in the final month of the season last year in Indianapolis, and the way Indianapolis just threw him aside, you have to wonder what Carson Wentz represents these days. So, Washington and New York, to me, are almost, I don't want to say a non-factor, but they're pretty far up the track. It's going to come down to the Eagles and the Cowboys again. And the history of this division. There has not been a repeat winner of this division since the Andy Reid team in, 2002, 03, which is 20 years since an NFC East champion has repeated the next year. Well, Cowboys won it last year, and to me, they don't look like they're going to repeat this year. And it ain't going to be Washington, and it ain't going to be the Giants. So process of elimination tells you that it looks like the Eagles. And I think they're good enough. I think they're good enough to win it and maybe win it comfortably.
And Zeke Elliott is not the back he was.
No, he's not. No, he is not. When you look around, there are different philosophies that we see in pro football. And one of the philosophies is you don't draft running backs high. They get hurt. They don't. You draft a running back high. It's a short-term investment because they generally give you a couple years and you've got two evidences of it in the NFC East. You got Zeke Elliott in Dallas, and you got Saquon Barkley with the Giants. Two teams that, they went big for a running back high in the draft, and everybody said, I don't think, you don't draft running backs that high. You just don't. And this is kind of why. Zeke Elliott was a real good player for a couple years, but now you see, if you watch him now, he just isn't the same. He doesn't have the same burst anymore. He's not the same player. And Saquon Barkley hasn't been the same player almost since his rookie year, since he had the big knee injury at the start of the second year. So that's why when you hear people say, you don't draft running backs high, and people say, why? That's silly if a guy's a really good player. No, this is why, because you can find running backs later in the draft, in third round, fourth round. You can find guys. If your line is good enough and the rest of your offense is good enough, you can find backs that will win for you. The Eagles have done a really good job of that. Shady McCoy was a second-round pick. Brian Westbrook's a third-round pick. You can find those guys, but you need the other guys. And sometimes investing that high draft pick proves to be not the best investment you can make.
They did well with Gainwell last year. He's a good football player, and they stole a guy off the practice squad of the New Orleans Saints by the name of Boston Scott, who just comes in and brings a spark.
Yep. Yeah, you got that. And I like Gainwell. I thought Gainwell was a fourth-round pick, and I was surprised. When you watch the draft, and I do a lot of study in the draft, and I prepare for it, and I watch this tape, and I try to be a general manager in my own mind. And on draft days, you kind of watch the way the board moves. And I remember really liking Kenny Gainwell in Memphis when I saw him play, and I was very surprised we came into the third day of the draft, and I was looking at the guys that were still on my board. And I looked and I said, wow, Kenny Gainwell's still there. Now, this is without ever knowing that the Eagles were going to take him or that they had any interest. But, you saw him come in and right away, early in training camp, he just looked like he belonged. Sometimes when you look at rookie players, sometimes even high draft picks, you put him on the field with pros, and you just say, he doesn't look like he belongs yet. And then there are other guys that step out there and you say, he belongs. He moves like a veteran, he's smart like a veteran, he does veteran-type things. And that's what you saw in Gainwell. And he's a really good receiver. That's what they drafted him for. But he runs it between the tackles better than you think. So, and I like Boston Scott. Boston Scott is one of Seth Joyner's favorite players. Seth Joyner loves Boston Scott. So, and if Seth Joyner likes them, that's good enough. That's good enough for me. So this is a pretty good team the Eagles have. They really, really do. And I do worry sometimes that the expectation is kind of where it is right now, which is like right up here. But if you look at the roster that they've got and you look at their schedule, which is pretty favorable, yeah, I think the opportunity is there for this team to do big things.
Ray, this is the fastest hour in broadcasting. Just to sit down with you, and an hour is gone.
Wow.
So we thank you so much for being here today. We thank all of you from the Northeast Chamber of Commerce, Northeast Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, for being our guests. Thanks to Chris Ermer, our engineer, and thanks to Matt Miro. We still haven't figured out what he does. So for all of us, see you later. Bye-bye.